What's up, RotoViz?
Welcome into the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. It's Tuesday, Take 5. It's the new format we're doing for the 2023 NFL season. Every Monday evening during Monday Night Football, Dave Caban and I are running down the top 5 fantasy performances from the Sunday games and figuring out, using RotoViz Advanced Metrics, what really drove those performances. Do we have any takeaways for future weeks and for your fantasy teams? So, we think you'll enjoy this. You can follow along. If you're live streaming, you can follow along and see the data that we're using in the Monday review tool, where Dave imports all of this data for your viewing pleasure each Monday. Dave, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good. It was a very exciting weekend of NFL action.
Yeah.
There are 2 games going on my television right now that I have paused that I need to catch up on. Some absolutely wild performances. We're going to be talking about Miami some in what was an absolutely insane thing. And Curtis, I got to bring this up, right? Because I have a platform in which I can say it. I swear that at noon, while I was sitting there working through my lineups, I swear that I had a team where I said, you know what? I feel like trotting out Raheem Mostert this week, and I subbed him in for Brian Robinson. I fell asleep for a little bit. I woke up at the start at like 1:10 and realized that this change had not happened. So I don't know if I was dreaming it. I don't know what happened, but my team is doing very well. And if I look at the total leaderboard in the FPC, I really would have liked to have had those extra like 40 points that I would have had from Mostert.
Yeah, the upgrade from Mostert to Mostert from Robinson would be appreciated in any lineup. We'll get to Raheem Mostert's banner day when we break down the running backs. Dave, why don't you hit a drop? Let's get into the quarterback position. All right, so we are running through the RotoViz Advanced Metrics behind the fantasy breakout performances in Week 3, starting with the quarterback position. The top 5 performers this week were Justin Herbert, Tua Tagovailoa, Lamar Jackson, Kirk Cousins, and Patrick Mahomes. Of course, this excludes Monday Night Football. There's some really interesting things laying behind some of these performances, but man, as exciting as it is to talk about the quarterbacks, like the performances they drove for some of the other skill players are what we really want to talk about. So we're going to go through quarterback kind of quickly because when we get to running back and wide receiver, I think we're going to need to camp out there and spend some time. Now, the Chargers and Vikings game, Dave, that was one that everyone had targeted as, a big time shootout, and it really didn't disappoint, especially on the Chargers side of things. I mean, Justin Herbert completed 85% of his passes on 47 attempts. I mean, this guy's 40 of 47, 405 yards, 3 touchdowns, added 11 yards on the ground. And the thing that was just really nice for you and I, Dave, is that connection with Keenan Allen just really coming to the forefront. We're obviously going to talk about Keenan Allen in the wide receiver section here, but Herbert he was dealing, man. 319 passing air yards, definitely a top 10 performance there as well. 29.3 fantasy points. And it goes to show you as much, value as we place on running the football for the quarterback position. Some of these gunslingers can still get it done, and the game environment was right, Dave. So Justin Herbert, he was so easy to stack on the back end of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams selections in best ball all offseason. So a lot of people, probably seeing those teams climb up the leaderboards, as you kind of hinted. You're watching one of your squads do that. Anything that you would like to take away or add on this Chargers quarterback performance this week?
I would just like to add, too, that, this was a performance that came on the heels of a lot of air yards passed for 319 total air yards. Did have an average depth of target of 6.8, not the highest total on the week, but higher than the passer that we see actually the next 2 passers right behind him. So just really good stuff from Justin Herbert. Last year, I feel like at points, some people were questioning how good he was. I think the way that this system's functioning this year, you're going to see a lot of people realize that you put him in the right system. He is a very, very good quarterback.
All right. So through 3 weeks, Justin Herbert, no Austin Eckler, no problem. Him and Kellen Moore are doing just fine. Of note from this game, Dave, I don't know if you saw the update yet today. Mike Williams was diagnosed with a torn ACL out for the season. So I think they'll lean in even harder on Keenan and maybe some other players who were targeted later in drafts as well. As sterling as Justin Herbert was, Tua Tagovailoa, 88.5% completion percentage, 23 of 26 for 309 yards and 4 touchdowns. The man could do no wrong. It was all happening after the catch this week. We lauded Tua for pushing the ball downfield in week 2. In week 3, it was really all about what the skill players did for Tua. I mean, they were basically mercy ruling the Broncos throughout this game, and it just didn't matter. Like Tua just kept throwing touchdowns, only 150 passing air yards despite his 309 actual passing yards, 28.4 fantasy points this week, less than a point behind Herbert for the QB1 crown in week 3, Dave.
So, yeah, you kind of alluded to this, but what's pretty crazy here, Curtis, is an average depth of target of just 5.8, the lowest of any quarterback on our leaderboard, with the exception of Dak Prescott this week. But if you look at the yards per attempt, they're at 11.9. He's the only player that crests 9. And actually, the player behind him, interestingly, is Josh Dobbs. But it just goes to show how insane what his skill players were doing with the ball after he got it to them did this week. So incredible stuff for Miami in that game. That's going to be one I think people remember for a very long time.
I mean, he didn't even have Jalen Waddle, right? I mean, like it's insane. It's insane what the Dolphins are doing right now. Really fun to watch. At QB3, Lamar Jackson. The Ravens are not putting together, this 6,000 passing yard type of season that, people are going crazy about after watching camp this summer. But, hey, if Lamar can go 200, 100 in a handful of weeks this year, I mean, all of his fantasy managers would sign up for that in a heartbeat. You give me 3,500 passing yards and over 1,000 rushing yards, that feels pretty good. So he does not get into the end zone through the air this week in this surprising loss to the Colts. But he did add 101 yards on the ground and 2 rushing touchdowns, 28.2 fantasy points, just 2 points behind. Tua finishes as the QB3. Dave, I mean, he was trying to get it done. I mean, 189 passing yards, 202 total yards, but just 22 of 31. Yeah, it doesn't really seem like there's still that great downfield connection. You would almost hope that connection with Mark Andrews was really even coming to the forefront a little bit. What's nice about Lamar is he is bailing out his managers with this performance with his legs, but you would like to see him create some of that chemistry with Zay Flowers or others, and then get back to the basics with Mark Andrews. And they haven't quite been there yet. I think that breakout game is yet to come, but it's coming soon.
So here's the crazy stat in this one, Curtis. Lamar Jackson, his yards per attempt passing 6.5, yards per attempt rushing 7.2, which just kind of tells you what transpired through the air in this one.
Are you serious? That's amazing.
I'm serious. Full yard more.
Oh wow! I'm not. When have you seen that before? I mean, that's incredible.
I mean, I can't say that I paid attention to this, week in and week out. But, his average depth of target was just 6.1. So this is something you probably do not see very often.
Yeah, this is like, I guess this is probably a Lamar / Justin Fields stat that we could keep an eye on in coming weeks. So those are the top 3. I mean, rounding out the top 5, we've got Kirk Cousins and Pat Mahomes. Totally different game environments for these two guys, but, they both delivered. Captain Kirk, 367 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. 28 yards on the ground, which is, yeah. I mean, give it up.
I gotta applaud Kirk every chance I get.
It's Dave's boy. It's Dave's boy. 28 rushing yards on the ground on 3 attempts. No rushing touchdown, but Kirk with a couple scrambles there. 223 passing air yards, 25.7 fantasy points. Actually ties him with Mahomes at QB5. Mahomes, totally different game environment. I mean, they just absolutely boat raced the Bears 41-3. Taylor Swift was in attendance cheering on the Chiefs, which I think was more interesting than anything that happened in the game. Right. Which is nuts. I I really loved seeing the various social media posts like Taylor Swift and Mama Kelsey hanging out at the game. Like, I don't know. I guess it just strikes me funny anytime you would see Taylor Swift and the words Mama Kelsey next to each other. Is, of course, that gave my wife some interest in the game.
Yeah, I was gonna say my wife and I talked about that as well. Apparently too, she made quick friends with Tom Hiddleston's mom, but that didn't last either. So there's a lot of storylines there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a Taylor Swift pod, but maybe we'll do that in the future. Three touchdowns, 272 passing yards for Pat Mahomes, and I was actually mixed up these rushing lines, Dave. It was Patrick Mahomes. I'm looking at their names right next to each other with the 28 rushing yards. Kirk only had 10 yards. Sorry, I got to subtract 18 from that from your boy.
Well,
but I mean, Mahomes just making classic Pat Mahomes plays. I think the highlight of the game is probably the step up into the pocket, the roll out to the right, firing a dime 30 plus yards downfield over the outside shoulder of the receiver where only he could get it. I mean, this guy's just an alien. And, even in a game where the team, was way out ahead and Patrick Mahomes leaves early, with a little bit of, being dinged up, he's still a top 5 fantasy QB. I mean, you can't get any better than that.
Took 0 sacks also, which is, always something that you like to see for your fantasy passers.
All right, let's hit the running backs. It was the Miami show, man. 8 touchdowns. 8 touchdowns by Miami running backs. I mean,
my Lord.
You would have, if either Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert had scored 2 touchdowns, people would have loved it. And each of those guys doubled it. I mean, it's just, I can't, I actually did see this because Adam Harstad put it on X. This happened back in like 2004 or 2003 for the Chiefs or something. And it was like Derek Blaylock and Larry Johnson or Priest Holmes or somebody like that. I mean, it's been 20 years since this has happened, and it's happened rarely in NFL history. This was just crazy. It was crazy. Yeah. I mean, Mostert went berserk early in the game, and then Achane just kept ripping off long runs. I mean, both of them had, over 4 receptions, Mostert with 7. I mean, the Dolphins literally were trying to keep the ball short and not embarrass. I mean, Sean Payton's going to retire after this game. I mean, this was just absolutely nuts. The scoring's just it's crazy, man. Devon Achane, 51.3 PPR. Raheem Mostert, 45.2 PPR. If you put those two together, it's 96.5 points. Okay. If that's more, Dave, it's more than the next 4 running backs combined. Running backs 3 through 6 for the week didn't score as much as running backs 1 and 2 did. Just absolutely insane. The system and the talent overlapping. What are some of the advanced stats, if you care to share any from these guys?
All right. Well, the first thing that's really insane about this is you have, as far as a receiver goes, Raheem Mostert putting up 71 yards after the catch, actually at an average depth of target here of negative 1.6. And then he's turning that into 71 yards after the catch, total of 60 receiving yards. Achane, similar thing there. Of course, he had the 2 receiving touchdowns. In terms of rushing, Achane at 11.3 yards per attempt. Not really an advanced stat there, but just
on 18 insane. Carries. On 18 carries, he averaged 11.3. Those are unheard of numbers for an NFL game.
Right. So, I mean, the other thing too, actually, that stands out about this, Curtis, that is pretty interesting is you had Achane with a 14.3% target share, Raheem Mostert with a 25% target share. And you saw what they were doing. I can only imagine what would have happened if you potentially would have had Waddle there and Hill, and imagine if you just given them each like a 40% target share. They may have scored every play.
Yeah, because Tyreek went, nuclear too in this game. We'll get to him in a minute. It's, hey, so the Dolphins look great. They look like they could be on a historically, impressive pace. It's a long season. There's going to be some games where this type of stuff doesn't happen. You're counting your blessings. I think Mostert was probably in a lot of lineups because of other running backs that were out, and he's looked pretty good, so far this year. for a chain, I mean, I've seen stats. He was only started in 4% of like FFPC leagues where he's rostered. People waiting to see that breakout. That's the thing, with these guys. It's like, the second that we saw that Mostert was going to be backed up by a chain and the depth chart had thinned out, we see this at wide receiver all the time. And it's one thing that RotoViz preaches, especially Sean, about the importance of capturing the breakout performance when it happens. I mean, if you missed the 51.3 because a chain wasn't on your best ball roster, but you're talking about a roster management team, you can't get that back, and it could matter for tiebreakers. It could matter for league titles. So there is a lesson behind this breakout for a chain as well, is just to keep, be mindful of what's happening with the depth charts heading into a Sunday and game environments that, could spur players on to breakout performances. There were 3 other big performances that we want to get to at the running back position. Kenneth Walker, man, Kenny Walker, an RB3 week. I mean, 2 touchdowns, Dave. Yep. And you look like a focal point of this offense. Carolina came into town trying to get it done, get this road win against the 12 in Seattle. Kenneth Walker's having none of it, man. I mean, 30.6 PPR. I'll have to go back and check for accuracy after the recording, but if memory serves, this may have been the best performance of his career to date.
It may well have been. And, something interesting that's worth pointing out here too, yards after the catch seem to be the theme of the day, but we'll talk about Christian McCaffrey in a minute. But McCaffrey had 5 receptions, 45 yards after the catch as a point of reference there. Kenneth Walker, 3 receptions, 42 yards after the catch.
Yeah.
So we're seeing him, show some ability too as a playmaker on receptions as well, which if he's able to put that into his arsenal in addition to the rushing that we're seeing out of him, he's in line for a couple more performances like that. So very encouraging from Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, I mean, we know Pete's going to lean on his backs. We did see a little bit more from Zach Charbonnet this game as well. So maybe the Seahawks are still kind of figuring out that offense. We haven't seen the breakouts at the wide receiver position yet. Gino's starting a little slower than he did last year. But hey, I mean, Kenny Walker could end up being one of those big values as a year 2 back from fantasy drafts this year. So, highly encouraging. He was obviously in a lot more lineups probably than Mostert and certainly than a chain in week 3. So congrats to his managers for starting him. You already alluded to CMC's performance. I mean, this is going way back to last Thursday night. And I mean, he just continues to be a revelation. I mean, those drafters that took him, even over Jamar Chase, at the 102, I even saw some people that had him as their 101, especially in half PPR formats. I mean, you can just set your clock to this guy, 22.9 PPR in a somewhat just kind of pedestrian performance. He's still out here throwing up an RB4 week, Dave.
Yeah. CMC, just doing more CMC like things. From a receiving perspective, we do see him capture a target share of 14.7, always going to have a healthy target share. Goes for 4.7 yards per rushing attempt. McCaffrey, like you alluded to, I think, one of those players really justifying the investment that fantasy managers made into him, and this really shouldn't come as a surprise. So, as always, just good things from CMC.
Well, a late preseason / early season waiver wire darling and Zach Moss actually is the RB5. I mean, many had hoped that Jerome Ford would be there. He did have a nice week. He didn't make the top 5 though for our Tuesday Take 5 episode here. It was Zach Moss with just a gargantuan 30 rushing attempts for 122 rushing yards. Did not get into the end zone, but it didn't matter on the ground because he did through the air with 23 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. I mean, it's the year 2023 and Zach Moss is still relevant. I did not see that coming from a dynasty perspective or from a prospect perspective. And I mean, to his credit, I mean, he's producing here with Minshew mania going on, even without the benefit of Anthony Richardson and his running threat. I mean, this is big stuff. I wouldn't have thought we would have seen any 22.5 PPR games for Zach Moss, but right now he looks like a focal point of the Colts offense.
Well, so this is one of those performances too that kind of underscores this interesting thing that we're seeing with running backs in the league, right? No Jonathan Taylor Yet we are seeing a Colts team now being constructed in a way different than expected, with their leading rusher going for 122 rush yards. Now, you could say, well, he did rush 30 times, but he still put up 4.1 yards per carry. Would Jonathan Taylor have done better? Probably. But it's just really notable what Moss was able to do for this offense. And I think Moss is also an example of sometimes you have these players, Curtis, that every time you want to push them off to the side, once they get a little opportunity, they just come crawling back in. And, Zach Moss just feels like the prototype for that. There's a lot of times back when he was with Buffalo where you thought you might have seen the last of him, and he'd kind of resurface. Who was the back that he was kind of sharing that backfield with at the time? I can't even remember right now. Another player that never fully put it together. Who was it?
That was Devin Singletary.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was him and Singletary.
I mean, he kind of put it together a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they were. It was kind of like a the whole was greater than the sum of the parts type situation. I mean, working in tandem, they were complementary pieces. But yeah, I mean, Zach Moss was the ultimate, kind of compiler type back, and he's still good enough to win you your fantasy week on volume. It does make you a little sick to think about what types of performances Jonathan Taylor could have been putting up with this type of workload. And, if the Colts are, 500 or better, maybe he won't feel like he needs to prove his point. Maybe he's back here, in a month or so in your fantasy lineup. So, but for right now, those who added Zach Moss off of the waiver wire or drafted him late in the drafts are very happy. Let's get to the wide receiver position where things were just as exciting as the running back position. And our boy Keenan Allen, the guy we were drafting a round ahead of ADP all offseason, Dave, the focal point of so many Curtis, Patrick, and Dave Caban shared fantasy teams this year, leading the way with 45.5 PPR, insane numbers. Keenan Allen now has the record for most 15 reception games in a career. Dave, he had 215 receiving yards. Yeah, play it, man. I mean, play it. He had 20 targets. 41.7 target share. Justin Herbert was really just singing his praises after the game, called him a quarterback's best friend. It's exactly what we envisioned happening. With Mike Williams out, we could lean into this even further, perhaps. Could we see a Cooper Kupp type season for Keenan Allen? Time will tell. Give us a couple of the advanced metrics from the Monday review tool here, Dave. Sure.
So an air yard share of 36.4. He did have 99 yards after the catch, a racer of 1.734, which is essentially getting at his conversion rate on air yards, which was very, very high. Only Deebo Samuel had more this week. Weighted opportunity rating, actually, that was fairly, well, in comparison to an 88, pretty high. But like you kind of spoke about, he's probably now going to be capturing more work with Mike Williams not there. And, Whopper's one of those things you look at when you're trying to find guys moving forward that are going to continue to have either, a breakout on the way or to continue doing what they're doing. So you love to see that for Allen. And then from a target share perspective, was at 41.7. You asked the question about if the Cooper Kupp season could be in play. If somebody's going to do it this season, there's really a great case to be made that it's going to be Keenan Allen. Just tremendous volume, able to do so much with it. And people that might have thought that Allen was going to, lose a step approaching this, later portion of his career just does not appear to be happening.
Oh man. Yeah, it's so good. You can't victory lap good players in week 3, but Keenan Allen and actually the top the top 3 wide receivers in the Take 5 this week are all guys that were accused of being over the hill for this year. So as a guy that is careening towards his 40th birthday later this fall, Dave, you love to see it. You just absolutely love to see these veteran wide receivers doing their thing, man. So congrats to Keenan Allen on one of the best games of his career. Devontae Adams, put up a huge performance in vain as the Raiders lose an embarrassing home matchup, but not Devontae Adams' fault here. He also had 20 targets alongside Keenan Allen there. 13 receptions, 172 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. 240 air yards from Jimmy G. I mean, that's nuts. What else can you tell us about this Adams performance? Because, this guy might prove to be one of the best values of the early second round. And, he probably should have been being drafted over a lot of players that went at the 1-2 turn.
Yeah, so if you look at the top 20 this week, his 240 air yards, the next closest player is kind of a surprise, is DJ Chark at 188. Speaking
he
to
just
the
murdered the field. Murdered the field.
He did. He actually accounted for 52.6 of the Raiders' air yards, an ADOT of 12. Also, one of the stronger weighted opportunity ratings of the week, which kind of speaks to the quality of what he's able to get in concert with the volume there. And as you said, 172 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. Also, the 20 targets is just insane. But the thing is, you give Devontae Adams 20 targets, and you know that it's going to be hard for you to spend those 20 targets any better. More of this is on the way. And, the exciting thing about some of these players, and I wrote about in the passing game matchup article this week, is there's certain players like Adams that are just so good that the matchup doesn't mean anything. We see that from him time and time again. No matter what the situation is, he's going to go out there and ball. So some fun names that you're expecting to see. But Curtis, another player that may have had a couple of mentions, may have got placed onto a couple of our teams. And some of these teams were accused of being a little boring, but I think one of these names is showing, a little bit of excitement this week.
Yeah, man. The number one exposure across my number one wide receiver exposure across my 500 plus best ball teams this season, Mr. Adam Thielen. He's not dust, Dave. I was worried he was dust after watching the first couple games. He's not dust. 14 targets, 11 receptions, 145 yards. I mean, I think people that would have argued against Thielen would have said, yeah, if he has an 11 reception game this year, okay, fine. It's going to be for like 81 yards. He did real damage on the road for Andy Dalton, filling in for Bryce Young here. And, this is what the Panthers, had envisioned, one guy, old reliable, as they start to kind of build this new offensive program there. And I got burned going in hard on Jarvis Landry when he, became a New Orleans Saint. It looks like at least there's some hope for not getting burned on this Adam Thielen call. Despite it being highly, highly, highly boring, he's got something left in those legs, Dave. I mean, I'm going to quickly run it down here because I want you to tell us all about Tyreek's exciting season. But 28.9 air yards share for Adam Thielen, 40 yards after the catch. I mean, he's always been a shifty, agile guy in space. It's nice to see him still adding something there. With the legs, a 9.9 ADOT, which is respectable, over a 1.05 in his racer. I mean, 31.5 PPR. I mean, I think if you would have said Adam Thielen's best week in 2023 over or under 30 PPR, it would have been a 90 to 95% people voting under on that. So, I mean, this is a huge game for him. And, you feel good for him after basically being told to leave town. With the Vikings, it's nice to see him have at least one game's worth of success in Carolina.
Yeah, the other thing here too, Curtis, that's it kind of interesting about it though, is this was a game with Andy Dalton under center. You do wonder if when Bryce Young returns, we're going to see some more of this, or if it, kind of signals like, hey, like this is a player that can help you out, and that we need to get involved more. But yeah, when you see 138 air yards for players of Thielen's age, you got to like that.
The one thing I'll say here before we transition to Tyreek too is this Bryce Young injury. It was described as potentially being a multi-week injury. So with somebody like Thielen, a lot of people probably missed this game in their lineup. But if Dalton starts another week, I wouldn't want you to miss on Thielen's points. I mean, this connection is real. These are two veteran guys, probably able to speak the same language pretty easily. So as long as Dalton's starting, I think that you could safely pencil Thielen in as your wide receiver 3 or a flex. I wouldn't want to miss out on more performances like this. When Young comes back, if you want to give it a prove me week, I think that's totally acceptable. But don't miss the points next week if Dalton's back under center.
Also, how about Andy Dalton with a top 8 performance here in 2023 fantasy football?
Yeah, I saw a thing on Instagram earlier this week where somebody was talking about Dalton having success again, and it was like the problem with Andy Dalton has never been his ability. It's just been that what I look for in my quarterback is a guy that I would not feel comfortable spending an evening alone with my wife. And and the guy was like, if Andy Dalton shows up at my door and tells me that he's taking my wife to dinner and a trip to the go-kart track, I'm saying, have fun, buddy. Have her home by 11. So, I think that's just, it's been kind of the way he plays too. It's like, he's never been a big risk taker, but, somehow the fantasy points get there, and that's great. That's another one. I mean, he's been jumping around team to team to team. Kind of nice to see him, throw up a good game. He did throw, I think the game crippling interception there at the end, which is also something that he's done throughout his career.
Yep. So let's talk about Tyreek Hill, one of the other key pieces in that Miami Dolphins game. 11 targets, a target share of 39.3, which equates to 11 targets, put up 9 receptions, 157 receiving yards, and a touchdown, an air yard share of 68.1, 126 air yards, which kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier as to how like Miami actually was kind of like pumping the brakes here to some degree. And a racer of 1.246. So really converting those air yards strongly, finishes with 30.7 PPR. And I'm going to quickly do one thing here, Curtis, and just zoom out. And if we look right now at Tyreek Hill across the year, what's pretty interesting is 90.2 PPR, averaging over 30 PPR per game. Of course, Keenan Allen, who we talked about earlier, is actually 0.6 PPR ahead of him. But at this point, Allen and Hill a good 12 plus points ahead of Justin Jefferson.
Oh man. Yeah, it's nuts. It's nuts. I mean, Tyreek, he's just so good. He's just so good. And I'll say this before we get to the wide receiver 5. Tyreek's already told us he doesn't plan to play forever. Mm-hmm. He's going to totally Barry Sanders us, Dave. I mean, Tyreek is a player that should be able to, with his elite athleticism, he should be able to be highly viable into his mid-30s. And, I think that we're not going to see that. He may be one of these players that goes out on top. We really need to appreciate these performances from this level of player, while we can, because I mean, I've taken these players, these all-time great type players for granted before. But I'm really trying to learn my lesson here. And I mean, he's just special. He's must see TV anytime the Dolphins are on. Justin Jefferson, the wide receiver 5, Dave, no surprise. I mean, he's obviously a regular here. Did have 13 targets and 7 receptions, 149 receiving yards. It's another, 27 point PPR. It's not like Jefferson's a slouch. I mean, he's the wide receiver 3 with over 70 points through 3 weeks. But it's just, some of the stellar performances of other guys. It's like, yeah, Justin Jefferson's in there too, I guess.
Yeah. So, not to gloss over Justin Jefferson here, but I want to make sure that we talk about, well, I mean, Justin Jefferson, This is nothing new here, but I do want to make sure that we fit in, because, we're starting to encroach on the time allotted for this episode. I need to mention Tank Dell, right?
Yeah.
7 targets, 5 receptions, 24.1 target share. Goes for 145 receiving yards and a touchdown on 136 air yards, has an air yard share of 54, 48 yards after the catch, and ADOT here, easily the highest of the week at 19.4, converting strongly, 25.5. I think this is notable for a couple of reasons. One, Tank Dell, another example of a player that we see with good college production that people question due to the size. And I think that we're starting to see that the players that don't have the size that you've typically seen, when they do make it this far, it's normally for a reason. That's what you're seeing with Dell. And I also think it speaks to this crazy performance that we're seeing from CJ Stroud to start the year. So this is one of those fun teams. You got some new names coming into the fray here. You know, Nico Collins didn't have a great game, but it really does look like Stroud is going to keep Collins and Dell at a more than viable fantasy type of pace throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, you love to see it. He is not the only diminutive wide receiver posting big plays. We even saw Calvin Austin rip one off on Sunday Night Football. It's really cool to see the trend of different types of athletes producing some of these big fantasy performances. So, yeah, I appreciate you getting an honorable mention in there for our boy in the minus 165 club. Okay, so at the tight end position here, Sam Laporta with his first career tight end 1 week. I don't think it will be his last. Man, really impressive. He was the most fun name in the top 5 at tight end. Yep. We'll breeze through tight ends 4 and 5 because I don't think they're repeatable performances. But Sam Laporta, that's a repeatable performance. He tied TJ Hawkinson for the lead amongst the tight ends and with 11 targets this week. He also tied Hawkinson with 8 receptions, which was tight end 1 for the week. If you look at receiving yards, he was tight end 2, trailing only George Kittle. What were some of the advanced stats, Dave?
Yeah, well, a thing that I really think is worth highlighting here, an air yard share of 32. And that's 87 total air yards. And I think that's notable on a team like Detroit. Also worth mentioning that he has a target share of 35.5. And I think that this is exciting because Detroit looks to me to be a team that has some quality opportunity available there. Earlier in the year, we saw pieces like Khalif Raymond, Josh Reynolds getting involved, but I would not be surprised if as this season continues to move forward, you start to see some more of those kind of one-off plays getting concentrated into Laporta. So, you know, very exciting for some of these younger players there like Laporta and Gibbs when you start to think about what could be on the horizon for them throughout the rest of the season, and especially what could be on the horizon for them as you move into next year.
Yeah, I think the dynasty buy window on Laporta probably slammed shut after this performance. And I mean, it's great. It's great. I mean, he was, you know, if there was a reason not to draft a non-top 3 tight end. So, you know, everyone wanted Kelsey, people wanted Andrews, people were fine on Hawkinson. But the other guys that got kind of steamed up, you know, Waller, Goddard, and Njoku was hot for a bit. Yep. You know, that range of players, the reason not to select them in the rounds 5, 6, 7 is because tight ends like Sam Laporta were available in rounds, you know, 11, 13, depending on what point in the summer we're talking about. And I mean, this is awesome. I mean, this is a great tight end class. It's not going to be the last time that we see a rookie finish really highly up here. Dalton Kincaid's going to have his day. Luke Musgrave is probably going to have his day. You know, some of these other guys are going to have their breakout games. And, you know, this is an exciting one. He's going to have a long, successful career. He's going to be a desired fantasy asset for many years to come. Travis Kelce, he would aspire to model his career after 7 for 69 yards, Dave, with Taylor Swift in the audience and a receiving touchdown, 19.9 PPR. Nothing else to say about Kelce there. Kittle way back on Thursday night. I think this is one worth breaking down only because he's a little bit less consistent than Kelce. And we should also note that this performance came with the absence of Brandon Ayuk. So that's something that you want to take note of before you start thinking about week 4. Anything you want to share about Kittle's performance in week 3?
So I do think it's kind of notable what you mentioned there about Ayuk, because he does get to a target share of 26.5, 9 targets, goes for 90 receiving yards, had an air yard share of 37.4, did a good job at converting what he was given into yards. And then, of course, the touchdown. Weighted opportunity rating, though, of 0.659, which is, you know, one of the higher ones on the week. But I think once you see Ayuk come back, that is going to drop down. Your point about the consistency with Kittle, I think, is well noted. And as a result of that, you know, I think that it's an exciting performance, but it might be kind of hard to bank on this, you know, consistently week to week. Of course, he's a player that's going to be in your lineups probably no matter what. But, you know, I think it's worth calling out that this team does seem to function differently when you have Ayuk in the lineup.
It was, I don't know if you watched that Thursday night game yet this week, but he he was really vibing. The cool thing that I enjoy, I mean, he was playing very physical. He was super fired up throughout that contest. So that was good to see. I mean, healthy George Kittle is a very intimidating George Kittle. So it would be great to see him, continue that. And I mean, the Niners just look unstoppable. We already highlighted CMC. I mean, what a difficult team to game plan for. Do we have the sad trombone sound effect dialed up?
Yeah, we do. Are we ready for it to be played?
Yes. And I mean, Dave, when we see Pharaoh Brown and Donald Parham crest the top 5 at tight end in any given week, we know that it was a crap week. And, both these guys sneak in there unexpectedly. Now, for Pharaoh Brown, we had 2 receptions for 71 yards and a tutty. I mean, if you're going to break free, great. That's good for you. That's going to be a highlight. That's going to be a play that he's never going to forget in his career. Donald Parham, 2 receptions for 4 yards and 2 touchdowns. The ultimate vulture. Josh Kelly could have had a much bigger game if it weren't for Donald Parham here. These performances helped no one. So they are fantasy tight ends 4 and 5. On the stat sheet, certainly not in our hearts. So the honorable mention of players who could have actually helped a fantasy team, it would have been TJ Hawkinson and Evan Ingram, who are both, going to be regulars and continue to be regulars in this space. Dave, if we've been kind of keeping track of this organically episode to episode, and we did have 9 double-digit PPR performances from tight ends this week. So a little bit above average as compared to the first 2 weeks. And we did have 4 above 15 PPR. So things heating up just a little bit. Could be even better if we could just get Mark Andrews going. So we'll have to stay tuned on that in the weeks to come. I mean, I'm loving this. This is just getting me really tuned in to the breakout performances and some of the surprise places that they come from. Hopefully you guys are digging this Tuesday Take 5 format as well. Dave and I are going to be back later this week with another episode of Dynasty Command Center, and then also our Thursday night live stream start sit show. We are having so much fun with that. So if you're tuning in now, set your calendars. Listen, Thursday night around 7:30 to 7:40, we're going to be going live, taking about a half hour's worth of start sit questions and help you get those lineups in tune for week 4 dominance. You don't want to miss it.
Thank you for listening to the RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. Send us questions at rvffshow@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Dave Caban FF and at CPatrickNFL. Leave us a voicemail at 978-615-9214 and make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.